Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Jack.
And anyone listening, we are in Los Angeles. I'm in Venice. Matt is in West Hollywood, and it is about 9:30 in the morning on, what is it today? Thursday, April 12th?
Something 14th.
Like 14th. Oh, yeah.
My mother's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, Mom. And Matt is relatively new to this discussion and has been active and proactive in the discussion. So I wanted to have him come and offer his insight and thoughts and us a chance to dialogue over those thoughts with you listening out there. And just consider that what you're hearing, you may or may not agree with, but the opportunity to watch your responses and or reactions to it is your participation in this discussion. We may not see you, but I know right now you're there. And we may not hear you, but I know if you're listening, you're hearing us. And in that regard, I know you're there, we know you're there, and we are here to do whatever we can to foster a discussion about mental obsession, about the mental obsession that may help unravel some of what may seem too sticky and too impossible to undo or let go of. And that's our purpose. And if you have any questions, if you have any interests, if you have any comments, there's an email in the contact section of the website of the podcast. You're always welcome to email us, and we can get a hold of you directly, or I can send you to anyone who you've heard on here who you may have questions or an affinity to or a repulsion of. Either way, and most everybody who's participated is open to any outside thoughts and comments from anyone. So anyway, welcome, Matt, and I've been happy to know you these last few weeks.
Thank you. Same here.
So we talked between ourselves to begin with, just to warm up the discussion, given that it's morning and sometimes this can seem like a heady approach to life, and share with everyone a couple of the thoughts you had in terms of what you initially saw and have been applying in between the discussion. We have a weekly Sunday discussion that Matt's been part of, and share with everyone what you have seen and started to actually witness.
Well, what I had mentioned at the beginning is that I'm starting to observe my thinking in a different way. It's not completely new to me, but for some reason, and I would assume it's the the design of your talks and meetings are to have an impact, and they have. Like I said, it's not new to me, but for whatever reason, it's a little easier to let go of future thoughts that cause anxiety, worry and concern. It's like I'm able to diffuse them a little quicker than I normally would. And it's also seems like it's just a way of getting back to the present moment, which is where I want to be all the time. So, yeah, you felt me in that regard, and the meetings in general, and everybody's participation at the meetings has been really helpful.
Well, in my experiences, and the point of those meetings and our discussions is to bring this into public view, because it's typically something we do often with one other person, maybe, and never publicly in the broadest sense or in a broader sense, to begin to notice that humans dysfunction pretty much in the same way that they function.
Right.
And there's not this broad expanse that we consider to be so unique to us that keeps us alone thinking nobody else is ever going to understand, when all we've basically done is applied people, places, and things, this, that, or them, to stories that give us a sense of uniqueness, which are just excuses for claiming we're not part of the whole scheme that humans are designed to express, whatever that scheme or that plan or that natural order is.
Mm.
And to your point about it being new is, as far as I'm concerned, nobody needs to be told any of this, because we know it. And we wouldn't break down and have nervous breakdowns if we didn't know better. that level of nervous anxiety would be our natural state, and we would feel fulfilled by it. And we would tell people we're on the right track and we're happy and we're fulfilled and we're naturally doing what we are designed to do. We wouldn't think in those terms that have us say, I'm depressed. I don't feel good. I hate everything and everyone. I hate myself.
Do you have techniques that you use to snap out of what you might feel as though, when you feel you might have some obsessive thinking coming on and leading you somewhere that you feel may be
well,
detrimental?
Originally, I tried to affect my circumstances and thought that it was my circumstances that were the problem. And so I needed to fix the circumstances constantly. And when they got better, I'd always find that somehow they would either get worse or there would be a new problem in their place as soon as I resolved them. And it took me some time to get to the point where I realized that I was central to the problem. And no matter how good, what was interesting is when my circumstances got better and all the things I thought were the plague, not being able to be sufficient and self-supporting with finances, for instance. When I started to get ahead of that curve and didn't have those pressures on a daily basis, all of a sudden I started to feel those fears more than I did when I had the problems to distract me from them. And the problems,
So more proactive approach?
Well, in looking at it, I began to see that the problems were actually reflections of my own defective thoughts that I was using as a chance to gain perspective on what I was doing because I felt lost in thought. And if you think about, it's hard to, if you're not interacting and looking at the entire world in your experience and thinking you're going to sort your thinking out, sitting alone, contemplating the sick thinking, all you're doing is manifesting more sick thinking, thinking about thinking as the sole source of the potential solution. So as you pointed out before we got started, if I'm trying to think how to think less and I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking with the thinking that's thinking more about how to think less. And that's just an impossibility. And it sets up this sort of drowning pool of redundancy and an echo chamber and a feedback loop and all of this stagnation of, it's literally like inbreeding. And inbreeding notoriously has led to retardation in human genetics because it minimizes the pool of potential and begins to reinforce the worst aspects of that genetic structure over and over and over again. And it's the same with thinking. If I think of it as my only source and think about it as something I need to think to stop, then I'm using the problem in the sense that I'm relying only on thinking as the source and simply not seeing it accurately. So part of what I did when I solved my circumstances was begin to realize that the issue inside did not go away, and it actually seemed to get worse because now I didn't have all the distractions that kept my attention. And distractions, I would suggest, are not attractive or attractions, and they don't offer traction. So all they do is give me the sense, like denial, that something else is the problem. And if I focus more on it, I feel better because I'm actually taking the focus off my thinking. And even in being distracted, it relieves the thinking a little bit, and yet the thinking's going on. It just isn't getting my attention. So that's how it started for me. Now, when I feel it, I say, you're up to something. And I know that there's a lie that I'm maintaining, that I'm beginning to witness. And if I feel bad, it's evidence that I'm beginning to want to feel what I'm feeling rather than want to escape the feeling and deny the feeling and use my ability to pretend that going numb and acting oblivious is in fact improvement or a betterment of my condition when it's actually getting better at being worse or acting worse.
So you do observe it. You say you're up to something.
Yes.
And then say, stop doing that?
No, I do it. I embrace it. My sense is we can't let go of what we claim not to want to have. And one of the points you made is you like to get back to the present.
I do. I just thought of something my therapist likes to say. he says, isn't that interesting that I'm having that thought? No, like I'm up to something. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I don't know how much, but that's where my mind goes, and that's what I hope to do less of is to think beyond that. You know, to embrace it is, it sounds like an effective way of just saying, okay, that's what's happening.
Exactly. And I would suggest that the reason you can say that is because it's happening.
Right.
Right. So if your observation, and I would say we're all observers of what we're thinking, and if we were what we were thinking, we would never think about what we were thinking. We would just think and act in accordance with that thinking. We wouldn't be stuck in this sort of conundrum of thinking about thinking, but we're observing the thinking we're doing as though there's a conversation going on there with someone, which I would say is ego, trying to negotiate a settlement for the impossibility of trying to resolve thinking with thinking, the same thinking. So part of this discussion is starting to look at things. If something is seen accurately, it has no compelling, consuming, addictive nature, because all it does is provide relief. Because if we already know it when we think it, that alignment takes thinking off the hook of thinking that what it needs to do is sort the world out and sort life out and sort things out and be busy trying to get it right. When in fact, trying to get it right all the time is an admission that we know it's wrong. Right? So that's one bit of insight that you can apply. You wouldn't be fighting all the time. Nobody comes to me and says, I want to feel worse and I need to think more negative thoughts. They always say, I want to feel better and I want to think more positive thoughts for the most part.
Yeah.
And what does that suggest? That they're feeling worse and thinking negative thoughts. So the opposite of what we're claiming is also true for us to be claiming it within the construct of thought and a relative human experience. The opposite's always true. Something's really good, it's because it's not bad. You know, if I want to always be good, I'm denying that there's any possibility it could potentially be bad. And when it goes a little less good, I think I'm completely screwed.
Yeah.
That's how I used to have it all set up. And those extremes were just impossible to maintain. And I felt that that was the solution to life, was getting to one end and never recognizing that it was intimately connected to the other. And yet in the universe, opposites attract. Why? Because they're not apart. The further they get apart, like on a bungee cord, the more tension is created. The more extreme position I take, the more tension I create with the other side. So there's tension alone and anxiety, trying to make believe I can always be good and I can always be happy and that's what I need to be. And I'm always happy. I'm just happy. I'm happy all the time. Sure I am. What do you mean I'm not happy? Right? Rather than saying, you know, I tend to be happy when I resolve problems. I like that. I like resolving problems. I like functioning. I like creating solutions. I like participating in a functional manner that isn't causing problems, but actually resolving problems. That seems to be the nature, our highest nature. This other seeming nature that we impose on ourselves through thought is a natural consequence of an imposition on thought that isn't true, which means we're lying.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of, you know, one of many cliches that helps me sort out and break things down is just embrace the journey. You know.
Well, and what's interesting is when we think it is as something we have to do to have it the way it is, we're still relying on the idea that it's up to us to let it be, rather than begin to concede that if things are what they are right now, no matter what I think. And now thinking is really left to be what it is designed to be, which is free and responsible and a choice. So the content, thinking happens in humans, our content is choice. We choose the content of those thoughts. That's what we struggle with. We don't struggle with thinking, because thinking just does what it knows to do. If I'm breathing, there's some knowing that that's something I need to do. I don't need to understand air or the complexity of it or where it came from or get to the bottom of it or figure it out. And yet I keep breathing. And if I was to hold my breath and suffocate, which is, I would say, a good metaphor for the thinking I do when I'm suffocated on the perpetual nature of suffocate of thinking that thinking is the source and feeling suffocated as a result in anxiety. If I'm suffocating by holding my breath, I'm simply not doing what I'm designed to do. And so I'm creating an experience that would be desperate and filled with fear. But every time, regardless of the fact that I cannot see the air, every time I go to breathe it, it's there. Every single time so far for 67 years. And the deeper I utilize it, the more relaxed my body feels. And one of the conditions or byproducts or somatic consequences of suffocating thinking is sitting in ways and breathing in ways that barely let body and air into our system. So we're also creating that tension. We're actually participating in the creation of the tension that the body's under by not providing it what it basically needs. So going back to your first question is, what do I do? What I learned in the process is that when I was looking at things honestly in an absolute sense, not just in a relative, my truth sense that I fought for and identified as my limits and you needed to understand them. And if you violated my limits, you weren't my friend and I didn't like you, that kind of thing. But in an absolute sense, then I could begin to apply that to my thoughts. And if I started looking at my thoughts from that premise, I started seeing how many things I said as a result of things that I thought, because our words follow our thoughts like our feelings follow our thoughts. Our feelings are simultaneously created by what we're thinking about that's going on.
Yeah.
So if I think that because I don't feel like I'm in the moment or in the present, that I'm not in the present or the moment, I'm thinking that who I am is what I think, which would be ego. Follow that?
I'm thinking that who I am. Say that again, please.
If I think because I feel disconnected that I am not in the present, I think that my simple thoughts can violate the entirety of time and space. Is that possible?
No.
Okay. Yet we talk all the time about wanting to be more present. What are we really saying? That when I am paying attention to obsessive thinking, I am paying attention to lies that have no basis and no substance. And my attention that I'm paying to them is an indication that I think I'm struggling for my life. That's ego. And it gives me the impression I'm disconnected, not because I'm apart from the present state of all knowing and all being, but because my thoughts are disconnected. Do I feel disconnected? And yet what do? Turn that into, I'm not in the present. I exaggerate it to a point that I claim that the entire universe now has a gap in it because of my thinking and my feeling about my thinking, rather than say, oh, my feeling disconnected is actually admitting my thought is so disconnected, it has no basis at all. It has no substance. Of course it's disconnected. It has no place.
That's what I do.
Yes. Okay. So the transition there, Matt, and anyone listening or interested, is to notice that it's only when we can have any thought we want, including wrong thoughts. We can think people are complete idiots. We're free to do that. But when we think it's who they become because of what we think, now we have turned thinking into reality and thinking into truth. And when we do that, we think we are what we think because we now think they are what we think of them.
Yeah.
Rather than say, I can have a thought that somebody's an idiot, and the chances are they may do idiotic things, and they may think idiotic thoughts like I do, but it does not violate their absolute nature in existence at all. So if I'm mistaking them for what I think, I'm admitting that I think my thoughts are so true that they become what I think, which must mean that I become what I think. And the transition there, a lie is only based on the idea that something that isn't true is true. Okay? So if a lie is only based on being exactly the opposite of what it is, what is it? It has no basis. Because when a lie is a lie, surprisingly, it's true. So the freedom and the awareness, we know these things, and we have just acted in ways collectively that seem so normal, we call disease more normal than we call healing. We think healing is some rare miracle that happens when our bodies are designed to maintain balance. Yet if I'm constantly throwing it off balance and creating instability in it and forcing it to act as though there's an emergency when there's no other emergency than the one I'm faking and imposing on my experience, I am actually turning my instincts into something that normally protects me to end up being the threat I'm running from. It's a complete reversal. Addictive thinking reverses everything and has it all backwards.
Yeah, I do that too.
Well, being built on the same platform, by the way, I mean, between the species, there's very little variation in the genetic structure. Between humans, there's almost none. I mean, we have different traits, but if you think of those traits, they're largely based on appearance, not substance. Our substance is very close. Doesn't mean that we don't have differing capacities physically, or that we can't be born with livers and kidneys that don't function as well as someone else's, or hearts that have impairments. But humans have been stressing this. Genes adapt to their environment. And if the genes through history have been trying to adapt to insanity being perpetuated by people thinking about things that aren't true as their reality, there's a good chance that our entire genetic code has altered in a way that it doesn't quite know what to do with what's happening because it makes no sense. So it ends up making no sense in the way it expresses itself and the way that it was designed to get better. Adaptation and selection, natural selection, was partially, as I understand it, or in whole, designed to help us adapt to our environment so that we could be better accommodated with it.
Mm.
And in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, the talk about an allergy to alcohol was sort of a windfall of insight to realize that an allergy is an abnormal reaction to something, meaning our body doesn't know what to do with it. So what is the abnormal reaction? If we shouldn't be doing it, the thought is it's the only thing we should do. That's addiction. And when you think of thinking in that regard, you start seeing how many times you come to points where you think you only have one choice. And if you actually only had one choice, you wouldn't be thinking about it at all, because you'd just be acting on it. The same way that you know to breathe and you know to open your eyes if you want to see something, and you know to look over there if you want to see what's there. We don't do a lot of arguing about those things. We just do them.
Yeah.
So when we think there's no other choice, we know there's other choices, and one of which is not to make the choice at all. Because the freedom of choice is to be able to choose anything and actually choose nothing. That's the ultimate freedom. And in all respects, those are the choices. That's the choice we have when it comes to thought. If we're entertaining it and thinking we shouldn't be, then we're also thinking we shouldn't be where we are and we shouldn't have what we have, while we are exactly where we are with exactly what we have. And that's a pretty major conflict.
Yeah. Do you ever, I want to say, do you ever make not judgments, or determinations based on someone's upbringing, where they may have developed a more positive way of thinking?
I mean, our brains are designed to judge. So when I hear people say they don't judge, I ask them, how would they know they don't if they didn't?
Do you ever
Yes.
you know that do you ever look at someone's upbringing? You know, once you get to know them, you see how they were brought up. You see you have a feeling of the type of household they grew up in, the type of things they were taught, the type of parents they had. For me, I make judgments. This person, they have less anxiety than this other person I know. they approach things in a different way. They seem to be better at life. I make those determinations all the time. And then I start to look at, well, how did they get there? What was their upbringing back? What was their the environment they grew up in, the nurturing they received? I wonder how much that has to do with how we think and the tools we acquire to do so in a negative or a positive way.
It's interesting to me, which I use that term like your therapist a lot, how much we think things that are no longer happening are more critical than recognizing that everything that has ever happened is the sum total of everything that's happening right now. And if there is any hope and any value from that, it's having what's here now and seeing that there is no past to condemn us except the thoughts we have about things that are no longer happening. In ways they're no longer happening. What those parents did, how that kid responded and all that stuff. That's our present tense creating tension by thinking that something that isn't happening could possibly educate us while ignoring that everything that is happening is the education of everything that's ever happened. If there's anything to know, it's what's possible to know, and what we know is everything right now, because that's what's happening. And I would say that the past, if it's anything, is always in the present, and the present is always a culmination of everything that's ever happened. Everything, everywhere. So if there's any chance to do anything, it's always in the present, where that past is the sum total of our present experience. And starting to put that stuff aside, it starts to relieve a lot of the thinking we do about what we might be able to correct about things that aren't even happening anymore. And starting to see how quickly we use other people both to condemn us. Like if I had their childhood, I'd be different. And boy, wouldn't that be nice to look the way I see them. And how we can hold ourselves in greater contempt by seeing other people in a greater form and one we like and would rather have, which is another indication that we're unwilling to simply have what we do and have things as they are.
Yeah.
And that's the conflict. The conflict's the one we create in the ventures we take and the ideas we have about what isn't happening as being this source of some magic that's going to eventually explain to me what is happening, when all that's happening is right here and we're not listening. Our own willingness to travel in those directions is an indication that we're uncomfortable with what's going on, that we haven't practiced well enough this idea that we're always in the present, no matter what we think. And no matter how much we deny it, and no matter how distracted we are, and no matter how much attention we're paying to things that aren't happening, we're still in the present doing those things. And this begins to distinguish thinking as something we do rather than thinking of it as something we are. And those bits of thought relieve thought if they're accurate. My sense is truth does not contain any condemnation. It is what we think is true we are condemned by when what we think is not true. And we believe it, and we have faith in it, and we have hope in it. We would need no hope if we were actually expressing truth, because it would immediately provide all that it has to offer without any doubt or question or uncertainty. It'd just be fulfilling immediately.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, part of the idea of the podcast and being anonymous is giving the audience a chance to sit and simply listen and experience something that may be challenging in a more public way or in a more personal way, simply as an option to begin to look at what we're each doing is not that different when we start talking about it collectively. And that's how the Sunday discussion group started. I found that when I talked about it one-on-one, people would get little gains, but they were always hearing me harping on them and not other people. And when other people started listening to other people and people had those little aha moments and everybody said, oh, I do that all the time. Everybody started seeing we're not doing things differently at all. We just have different faces, times, and places attached to it and think that somehow that's unique to us, when in fact the underlying issue is the same. And the underlying tissue is the same. The filament, the basis of it all.
Yeah, that sharing in community is really helpful for me. Helps me visualize. Things which I get more out of when I can. I don't know. See things that I'm doing in somebody else.
Well, and the chances are that we are so intimately bound that the ultimate self is a combination of all of us. Because if it is absolute, it can't vary and it can't be individuated and it can't be divisible. It would be indivisible. So I would suggest there's a good chance that it's something everyone shares and knows in equal amounts, because it would be equitable and indiscriminate. It wouldn't hold things against people because they didn't behave properly. The things people don't behave properly over, they already suffer from the thoughts that led them to that behavior. Knowing that they're not true, they're just the self-centered ideas of what truth means, which always inflict a weight on our systems when we make believe it's who we are. And the beauty of that is starting to see, to your earlier point about embracing it, starting to see it as an actual, it's kind of like a chalkboard where the student goes up and tries to answer the question and gets the math answer wrong. And the board represents the potential of the correct answer, but also shows where the student went wrong in the application of that mathematical answer. So it becomes evidence. And if you see what we're doing that's uncomfortable as evidence that we know better, it starts becoming less likely that we're going to think it's the only thing we can do because our life depends on continuing to do it. Starts to fall, that whole thing falls apart immediately. Thoughts can seem so real. And one of the things I used to pose to my sponsees and other people that I work with is start to, when you think a thought is scary, sit with it and look at it and see if you don't start seeing right through it in a matter of a minute or two. If you're willing to sit with it, you'll see it isn't as solid as it seems to be when I'm constantly thinking about it. And it's the repetition of my thinking that's constant, not the thing I'm thinking about. The thing I'm thinking about, I'm using as an excuse to justify continuing to do the thing that I want to claim I'm not doing, to blame the thought I'm seeing as being the haunting problem.
Right.
It's the thing I'm creating by it. And as that becomes clearer, you start laughing rather than crying over the stuff. And and the other thing too is it becomes moving, literally moving in our experience, to begin to witness how quickly we might have condemned someone and yet how much value they have. And start to recognize that we've been grieving and mourning loss of those opportunities for some of us a lifetime, including myself.
Yeah. You just reminded me of one of my favorite aspects of AA meetings is the fact that we can laugh together at things that we wanted to kill ourselves over.
Yeah. Well, I would say that would be taking things a little more seriously than they are. You know, the fact is, reality doesn't have to be taken seriously to be real. And truth doesn't need to be taken seriously at all. And love doesn't need to be taken seriously to be love. They just are what they are. And that's great relief for humans who have lived making believe it's up to us to get to them. Because the admission that we can get to them suggests that they're not here now. And an infinite spirit would be completely impossible if there was any break in the whole of its potential or its capacity or its present. And we claim when we're not here in the present that somehow we have voided that thing and wonder why we suffer from seemingly spiritual dilemmas.
Yeah.
We're suffering from the thinking that tells us we can possibly be apart from it. We can't be apart from something we are a part of. It's impossible. Yet we can think we do, and that's the problem. Again, a lie. Lies don't really exist. If something only bases itself on being the opposite of what it claims to be, it has no basis at all. It's all just conjecture, literally. And if you think of conjurings the way they think of ghosts, that's where many of the apparitions and haunting images are derived from, in dreams, and the idea that when the lights are off, there's a ghost, but no matter how many times you turn it on and say there's nothing here, the idea for the potential of that living in darkness seems to have that possibility ever present, when there's light, it doesn't seem possible. Kids like the lights left on.
Yeah, right.
And as adults, to live in that darkness and be haunted and think the world is sick and the world's fucked up and the world is impossible and life is impossible are all extensions of the impossibility of the thinking we're doing. And so we blame everything everywhere else to simply excuse ourselves for not acting responsible for the responsibility that we have in creating the experience.
Mm.
And the one thing we each have is that switch. We can have the wrong thought, and then we can also think it's right and become self-indignant and fight everyone and everything, thinking someday we'll win that war.
Mm-hmm. It's overwhelming, to be honest.
Please.
Well, to absorb it, it hurts my it hurts my head.
Yes.
A lot, because I'm
I would
struck.
suggest, though, Matt, as you're willing to look at it, you're starting to actually feel the hurt you've been maintaining and thinking wasn't there and acting oblivious to.
Yeah.
It's kind of like people new in sobriety, and 6 months in, they always say, I feel worse. And I say, yeah, you're beginning to actually feel what you've been thinking and doing for years that you thought you weren't doing because you were mesmerizing yourself with the mirage of drugs and alcohol to give yourself an impression that wasn't true. It was just an impression. And it's the same impression we get when we make believe that who we are is what we think. Same thing. We spend a lifetime trying to maintain a mask, where if we were looking in a mirror with a mask on, we would certainly not think we were what the mask is. And if we did, we would certainly think to ourselves quickly, I got to be insane to imagine that I'm the clown in the mirror because I'm wearing a clown mask. And yet we do that in this other way because we can keep it to ourselves and think that we're not doing what we're doing and wonder why we have the exact same sensation of everyone else being crazy and the world falling apart and being impossible and life being difficult and hard and truth being brutal and honesty being brutal and truth being tough and love being tough. All those things are confined to thoughts that become obvious in their sickness when we start thinking of things that are absolute and infinite and unlimited. It becomes clear very quickly. But that clarity allows for the choice to say, well, why would I do anything to continue this? That makes no sense at all. While in the blindness, it seems to make all the sense in the world because we're literally having a blackout during the day.
I'm just here absorbing it, and I'm thinking. I do a lot of thinking.
Yes.
Around you.
So do I. Well, listen, I would suggest, and just consider this, and this too for the audience, as you sit there, you are anonymous to us, so you have no risk of being outed for anything you may be thinking that may amount to seeming crazy even to you. But when you start witnessing the reactive fear-based thoughts and start noticing what you're doing in them, you'll start seeing what's been wrong very clearly. And if you're not disturbed, then you're once again denying and maligning with thoughts that try to make believe what's happening isn't happening. And the best you can do is pretend it's not happening so you can feel better, rather than say, you know what? I'm actually witnessing the thing I've been running from for decades, the thing that I thought I could drink myself through, the thing I thought I could eat myself out of, the thing I thought I could use relationships and money and all the other distractions to escape. This is the thing I've been running from. And as you begin to look at it, it's like seeing a 9-year-old child who just has not been listened to for decades. And it's kind of sad, my experience.
Yeah. It's for me right now, it's more fascinating than it is disturbing. You know, when I'm thinking about everything, I'm relating it to past thoughts, past experiences, just to make sense of it and just to see how I've applied. Let's call it toxic thinking. That's one degree of my negative thinking, where it's so bad, like just go down rabbit holes and not be able to get out of it. But then there's just other judgments and ideas about things and lies and making and believing lies, making up lies, making up stories. So all of this, and I just go back and think about that, and I'm fascinated. Applying it to my life is fascinating. This new way of approaching. I want to say my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, my experience is at a point, the disturbing aspect of it becomes more obvious because the clarity of the things you're mentioning, the fascination, becomes so obvious. And ultimately, we are designed to express that infinite knowing source. That's the design of what thinking is designed to do. It's to express it, not to think about it, not to conclude it, not to figure out what's right and wrong, but simply express it in the moment. And what would that be generally? But considerate, caring, loving, supportive. It would mean actually witnessing what's happening. And the difference between seeing somebody based on what I think of them is to hold them in contempt for the things I'm thinking, so I can use them to excuse what I'm doing, rather than see them with compassion for any wrong that I actually see in them. In reality, something they're struggling with, I would naturally have compassion for that same person rather than use them to justify feeling bad about them.
And that makes me think about what I do is I'm so concerned about what other people think of me.
Yes.
So
that's because the thing you think you are is what you think.
Right.
So that would mean the greatest threat to you is other thinking and any other thinking.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, of course they're thinking, where does it start though? They're thinking this way about me, obviously. I know that, which is a lie. But so it's because that's what I'm thinking of them.
Yes. So as long as you think that of them, you'll think they're thinking that of you. And you will confirm it by making sure that that's all you see them do. So you can say, I knew I was right. When all you're doing is missing everything else that you're aware of in the name of acting oblivious to what's obvious. It's what denial is effectively the body's numbing agent. It's like the anesthesia of the brain. And what happens in our body when we bear that tension? We start to go numb. Tension actually begins to bleed the oxygen and blood out of the muscles because they become so tight, there's no room for it anymore.
Yeah.
And so the undoing of this is actually beginning, your shoulders drop, your neck drop. I mean, I've had my neck for 8 months cracking. These, like, it sounds like glass sometimes from the tension that was built up in there. And it largely started after our larger discussion started.
Yeah. When in AA meetings, when I see people, I get very, and I'm aware I'm doing it. It doesn't feel comfortable that I do this, but I do. I get irritated at newcomers that remind me of me when I came in.
Why don't they get over themselves?
Yeah. But how could they let themselves get
But
to
let's
that?
look at that just for a second, Matt. If you take that as something you shouldn't be doing and don't want to be doing and want to stop doing and all that kind of stuff, you're opposing the information it's giving you. And what it's giving you is that if you're seeing it in them and you're bothered, you're using them to see what you're actually doing. And the bonus is thanking them for that opportunity and perspective rather than holding them in contempt. And you can see the difference in the value. It isn't a lack of judgment that has us do that. It's my sense is we don't struggle because of judgment. We struggle because of the contempt when we believe the judgment is true. That's what happens. It's the same with thinking a lie is true. We can lie all we want. And we don't have any fear of admitting it's a lie. So it has no impact. It's like masquerading. It's like an actor on a stage. They're effectively taking on a character that isn't who they are, but none of them are trying to claim that they're King Lear.
Yeah.
And subjecting the audience to their power. And if they did, they probably wouldn't work much in the acting field because they wouldn't think they were acting.
Right.
So it's that transition in all these respects that turns judgment into contempt only when we make believe the judgment's true. But if you just look at the judgment and say, wow, that's revealing of what I'm thinking in ways that I don't even think I'm thinking, you can be thankful to that other person for offering you that perspective, even if it's only as far as your thinking goes, without ever saying a word to them. And your opinion and experience and interaction with them will change dramatically based on that insight. Because you can also witness and say, like some of the homework I give the guys I work with, I say, decide you hate somebody for a week. Just decide in your thoughts that you hate somebody and work on hating them. And you'll see how many things you start seeing about them that are hateful and how that list will start to grow. It gets velocity quickly. And yet, if you're doing it as an exercise, it becomes easy to see that we're also just exercising our right to do it in all these other ways that we thought were true and real and impossible to escape and based on our parents and based on society and based on every other excuse we've used rather than what we're doing right now. If the present is where everything happens, then nothing happens anywhere other than the present. There is no past or future that isn't present when it happens. And when the past was happening, it was the present. And when the future happens, it'll be the present. And if we are squandering the present right now and making believe we shouldn't be where we are with what we have, we're making believe it's even possible to be somewhere else with something else, which would suggest that we're not here now. We're literally arguing for non-existence to be our source. That's sickness. That's addiction. That's an attempt to turn everything upside down in the name of maintaining a direction in thought that's completely impossible, that develops an idea that's an imposition because we live with an imposter making believe it's who we are. It's never been true, and it's always caused stress and upturned our inner system with inner conflict and emotional turmoil. And we've always misread the cues by thinking it was something to get away from by thinking more positively. Well, why are we thinking negatively so much of the time? We don't even admit that. We think by focusing on the negative, it gets bigger. And I would say, yes, our awareness of what we're doing wrong might grow, but growing to the size of what we're doing wrong would be the accurate size to see it from or perspective. And it becomes easier just to start to let it go. And you don't even start it. You don't have to correct it. You just don't even start it. You start looking at saying, wow, if we share an absolute source, everybody has that, everybody. And anything I'm seeing that suggests otherwise is simply what I'm deciding to see. And I'm using it very often to escape what I'm doing. Or as I learned, I'm starting to use it to see that that person's offering me the perspective that I'm not offering within my own thinking. And pretty soon it becomes a little closer to home because I can feel the immediacy of the wrong and I can feel the immediacy of the reactive urge and the fight when I start thinking the wrong thoughts that I make believe are true and don't have to wait until I start to witness it in somebody else to begin to unravel it and begin to have it for what I'm doing, rather than think of it as something I should be opposing and stopping and never do.
It reminds me, when I do that, when I look at somebody else and I'm irritated because they remind me of me, I consider the fact that it's probably time to forgive myself in some way.
Yeah. Well, which is also an admission, Matt, that you're holding yourself in contempt.
Well, yeah,
But think of the self you're holding in contempt as the one you think you are, not actually who you are.
right. It's who I was.
No.
Well, I want to forgive I want to forgive myself for things I did before I got sober.
Well, what is it that you're doing about them now that's unforgivable?
Say that again.
What is it that you're doing about them now in thought that's unforgivable? Because that's the only thing you're struggling with.
Yeah.
And I will remind you that, they say the past is the past.
Yeah.
And it's done, by the way. So everything you did, you did. There's absolutely nothing you can do to change it. Nothing. It's already done. So the lack of forgiveness is in you thinking you can go back and change it again.
Maybe acceptance is
That's a beginning, but here's something to consider beyond that. And this may take, a minute or two or a week, but just consider it. If all we're ever doing that holds us in contempt and has us appear to be unforgiven and has us appear to not forgive others is delusional, what are we really doing? Making believe that a lie of imagination, the mirage of our own concepts, the dreams turned into nightmares are true and real. So if they've never been true and they've never been real, we've just been entertaining them as though they were, which means we've been thinking about things obsessively that don't even exist as though they're truth and real. So there is nothing to forgive when you finally let things be what they are and say, how can I be held responsible for being delusional when there's nothing there? It's delusion. It is a dream. It is nothing more than I make up in my thoughts. And I have been making believe and trying to solve them by creating more thoughts of a world of my own making, in a world of my own making, and wondering why I'm struggling. And when you begin to see, like the big book says, let go of old ideas, absolutely. Two things interesting about that. Old ideas are not happening now, only ideas now about old things. So where are ideas happening? Always in the present. The past is always held in the present as something not here. Why do I think I shouldn't be here? Because I think of a past as real. It isn't. It's just what I think about it. And I'm the sum total of those things. If I have anything to learn from those things, and I regret having ever done them, then how could I get better holding myself in contempt and almost assuring myself of doing those things again because of my own relentless inability to allow things to be what they are? It's almost a guarantee I'm going to repeat them. That's the unforgivingness. And letting things be as they are, by the way, is how they are right now, between us, between everyone listening, between everybody not listening, but also hearing, because the impact of considering these things impacts everything, everywhere, all knowing beings everywhere, all inanimate objects everywhere. When we're clear in our thinking, everything gets better. When we're dark in our thinking and heavy, everything gets heavier and worse. If we're willing to look accurately about what we're doing and we see what we're doing is delusional, the let go absolutely is beginning to recognize we never held on to anything other than the idea we were holding on to something real. That's it. There is nothing. It's just an idea, and it's what we're thinking about it that we keep reinforcing with addictive thoughts to try to make believe that the battering ram of those thoughts is going to somehow beat us into submission and getting better. And there is no fight in love, none. There is no contempt in love. There's no contempt in anything absolute. There isn't a self for that absolute to hate, so there is no self-loathing. It doesn't think, so it doesn't have a self to think of. It just knows. And that's our present absolute state of awareness right now. And we don't need to close our eyes and be quiet to recognize it. But if we do that meditation and get quiet and always find after 10 or 15 minutes that we feel better, we're starting to feel the better that we always are, because we're starting to let go of the thinking that we always do when our eyes are open and we're interacting with each other.
Mm.
My sense is the awakened meditation is actually beginning to interact on the basis of seeing that I can actually function on a level that's commensurate with my ability, or I can dysfunction a level that's commensurate with my disability that I cause by making believe it's up to me to make the conclusions and come to the right choice, rather than just do what I'm doing and do it in the most inclusive spirit, and know that anything I do wrong, I can correct immediately, and that it's never wrong enough to be something I shouldn't do if I did it. And the only real wrong is when I start fighting it and think that I'm embarrassed having been done it, and start to think that the self I imagine myself to be is suffering by other people's thoughts in relation to it, when it's the thinking we're all doing that's sick to begin with, to even imagine that we have an imposter living within us that imposes itself on us and causes depression and anxiety and stress.
It's good stuff, Jack.
Well, listen, my sense is if we talk about it accurately, and this has happened in our meetings as our discussions on Sunday, as you've seen, people say things that you wouldn't expect from them, because the thinking gets suspended a minute and bam, they'll all of a sudden see something with such great clarity that intuitive voice is expressed. You've done it. And people say, well, it really caught me off guard. And I say, yeah, because you're really witnessing how you're normally on guard. Defending, protecting, self-conscious. Self-consciousness, by definition, is an undue regard for appearance. And yet, if you think of the word, if we were able to imbue a self with consciousness, that would be a pretty powerful thing to do. And yet, what does it mean for what we do with it? Embarrassment. We are embarrassed to perpetuate the lies we tell about ourselves, and we are shy and reluctant and only hang out with people who don't quite get close enough to those things or conflict with those things, so that we can continue to maintain them and hide the shame and the guilt we feel for doing it.
Yeah. Now you've just sent me off on something else that's fascinating.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I'll be thinking about that.
Well, I want to do 3 of these with you, if you're willing. And the goal there is to show that there's an arc in the discussion between us, which gives people an experience that this is something that's an ongoing opportunity wherever we are, with anyone we are and without anyone, if it's just a tree we're interacting with. The recognition that tree is based on the same natural platform that we are, and begin to look at what trees do and what grass does and how easily it all grows, even in places that aren't being tended or cared for, and how naturally it does what it does. And it's not arguing with itself or other trees. None of them are picking up and moving because they hate the other trees in the forest. They share the water, they take what they need, they do things that we don't always do in ways that are commensurate with the nature that we share, rather than this unnatural state of unhealthy thinking we do. I wanted to read to you, though, quickly, Matt, the definition for overwhelm, which I think is really interesting. To submerge or engulf, to overcome utterly. And to feel overwhelmed is to begin to concede that the bounds of our ideas of who we are finally being witnessed by a view that completely annihilates the idea that there's ever been any limit in them at all. And the only limits that's been there is my insistence on defending them.
Right. It's very uncomfortable.
Yes, thank you. Listen, the discomfort is an acknowledgement that we are honest by nature, and that we're able to see what's wrong because it's disturbing. And to twist that into something to get away from ignores the fact that feeling and that awareness is a mirror image of the thought we're having that is disturbing. And to think of the feeling as the cause is to reinforce the thinking that we're doing as though it is not a problem and isn't wrong and isn't disturbing. So it begins to illuminate this cycle that we're always witnessing and we're always observing, and it's what we choose to do with it that makes the difference on our experience and creates the anxiety and the stress and the pressure and all those things. And I will tell you that I am good at doing all of those things. I am a master at denial. I've been a master at being cunning and lying and manipulating things to get what I want most of my life. The undoing of that was the beginning of seeing that it never got me what I wanted. Even when I got what I thought I wanted, I ended up feeling the same vacant feeling, if not greater, when I finally got that thing, because the thing I was striving for, I realized never gave me what I imagined it might. And that's the promise of addiction, is a broken promise. It starts in thinking. It reveals itself in reactive thoughts, impulsive behaviors, and compulsions. And if you're witnessing any of those, you are healthy enough to see them. You are healthy enough to recognize what they are and begin to see that they're just misty, foggy notions we're maintaining as truth and reality, and they have no basis. And you can start talking in ways that observe that, and you will see they'll begin to dissipate. Months later, you'll start realizing that certain things you used to always do in relation to people, you're not doing anymore at all. And you'll start seeing an improved sense of people like parents and family and friends very often. You start to say, I've almost never known this person. I have never seen them, but for the interactions we had and who I thought of, what I thought of them since. I've never noticed this thing. Even their looks become different.
That's exciting.
I am very happy to be able to do this at all. I appreciate the platform. I appreciate that people listen. I am fulfilled by the idea that we could do this as a greater collective, a human collective that begins to look at what's going on and makes the best of it rather than the worst of it. The name of making believe we've got to cover our ass and hide out somehow and be alone. And my suspicion is people are ready to do that. I think there's enough confusion in the world right now, and so many of these media opportunities that seem to be, once again, another addiction, are also a metaphor for the inclusiveness and the opportunity that people everywhere have to start listening to other people rather than just the local radio station that's harping certain things to maintain the cultures that have come to certain conclusions that keep them thinking everybody else is the enemy, when in fact it's what they're thinking that initiates that. And we do the same thing in our country. All countries have done that. It's the basis of nationalism and patriotism, all those kinds of things. And when countries make believe that freedom comes at a price, they're thinking about what we think freedom is rather than what freedom actually is, because there is no cost, there is no price, there is no loss or anything other than absolute, unlimited freedom to do exactly what we want. And when we're doing what we're designed to do, there's no negative connotation, there's no deficient, scarce expression. Everyone wins, everyone benefits, everyone learns and is open-eyed and fascinated, as you've described, to the opportunity and the experience. And the abundance of this world is still providing everything that we're eating every day and utilizing every day for every product we create that we make believe we need or consume. It's all coming from this same planet that has been providing the whole time. And the chance to turn those resources in everyone's direction are as possible as it is to turn this thinking in everyone's direction and to think naturally in the way we're designed to. So,
well, thanks so much for starting the conversation. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Well, you too. And I do too, Matt. Thank you very much. And everyone listening, with love, we will look forward to hearing you and witnessing you be here again at some other time. And I'll look forward to Matt coming back probably in a week or so. Matt, we'll think about something.
We'll think about it. I will.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jack.
Bye.
Bye.